ash grinds beneath their teeth, and the air tastes like iron. The mountain shudders, belching flame that turns the world red. Steel screeches. A spear gleams like frost, meeting a black mace that splits the night with thunder. Men stumble and cry, eyes streaming. Something falls, burns, does not die. A golden ring skims across cracked stone toward a lip of fire and stops. It does not sink, it waits, bright as a star gone wrong. For more tales like this, viewers who enjoy these journeys can support the channel with a like and a subscription. Share thoughts in the comments and mention where you're watching from. The story deepens with every voice that joins it. The slopes of Orodruin are a forest of shadows and torches. Bodies lie where they fell, their faces grey with ash, hands still curled around the things they held dear. The hissing lava sends up a stink of brimstone and scorched leather. Horses scream somewhere below, and that sound twists in the burning wind like something alive that wants to escape. There are 3 figures near the edge of the fire. The first is a tall king with a bright, cold face smeared with soot, clad in mail that has blistered at the edges as if it had brushed a sun. His spear is grounded, its blade a shard of winter. Gil-galad stands swaying slightly, every breath a rattle through scorched lungs. The second is a man who looks suddenly older than his years, his hands bloodied, the hilt of a broken sword clutched so tight that his knuckles glow white. Isildur's hair is stuck to his temples, and his eyes are wild with grief that has the shine of fever. The third is the ring that sits on the lip of doom. A circle of gold simple as a child's toy, catching a gout of flame and throwing it back to them with a languid smile. "We end it now," Gil-galad says. His voice is hoarse. The syllables seem too heavy for the ravaged air. Isildur's mouth is already forming the shape of refusal. "No. You must cast it in," Elrond says, coming into the circle of light. He's bleeding from a cut above his brow, and ash has made his hair and lashes grey. For the sake of all, Isildur's throat works. He looks at the spear, at the elf's ravaged beauty, at the broken sword in his own hand, and then down at the ring. In that look, the night widens, and the years behind him rush forward with all their weight. The white city drowned, the last white tree burning, the scream he can still hear of a father who just has fallen, the earlier shout when a brother died, the lash of black wind from Sauron's, dying as he fell like a struck tower. The heat makes sweat sting his eyes, and the smoke makes them ache, and sobbing takes his breath. "It is mine," he says, and the last word breaks. There is a movement behind them. A rank-and-file soldier of Gondor, his nose bleeding from the heat, stumbles and catches himself on a rock. He is trying not to listen, and there is no place in his head for this hearing, but the words come anyway. He cannot help looking at the ring. For a moment, he thinks he can hear water in that glow, a river over stones. He presses his palm to the rock, and the rock is hot enough to sear. Gil-galad does not move toward the ring. He does not even look at it. He is looking at Isildur's face, and something like pity goes through his pain. "It is your right to claim your father's blade and your father's crown," Gil-galad says quietly. "But this thing has no rightful master. He made it to devour mastery." Elrond's hand opens. The ring winks. It seems very small and very harmless, a trinket that any child might wear on a string. Heat beats at their faces until their eyes run. "I will not," Isildur says, and he takes a step, and it is toward the ring. For a heartbeat, 1,000 choices hang like swords over the breath of the world. The spear of ice stays planted, its long shadow like a line drawn in ash between doom and a path less trodden. Gil-galad's hand tightens on the shaft until the wood creaks. The first turning point feels like the end because it could be. Gil-galad could snatch the ring and hurl it into fire with a quickness that has ended kings. He could strike Isildur down and say it was necessity. The shape of the ages bends under that possible weight. The scream of the mountain steadies, and then the moment gives way. Gil-galad does not take the ring. He steps back, and the movement seems to cost him everything he has left. "Do not put it on," he says. "If you will not destroy it, at least leave it bare." Isildur stoops, and his fingers close around the gold that should be molten, but is not. He lets out a breath that is almost a groan. He does not put it on. He laces it on a thong and slips it under his mail. He touches it as if he could feel its heat against his skin and find in that burning some balm for the burn in his heart. Elrond's mouth is tight as a wound. He will not give it up. He says to the king who stands with him, he will carry it north. Gil-galad nods. The fire throws his shadow long along the ash-streaked slope, the spear a black line upon red. The High King of the Noldor tastes smoke and copper and his own inevitable failure, and for a moment he is just a man burned by his enemy's fall, holding on to avoid falling himself. Below, the battlefield groans. The last drakes of Sauron's breeding thrash in their dying. Orcs wail like winter wind in a ruined pass. The men of Gondor have begun to sing something rough and cracked with grief, the sound making the air around them pulse. A soldier, the same one whose hand is blistering against the rock, staggers down the slope, with tears cutting channels through the ash on his face. He does not know what he has witnessed, not really. He will remember a ring in firelight, and a king who did not strike, and a man whose eyes were all flame. He will carry it back to the camps and tell it with his breath steaming in the night. It will change everything that follows. In the camps on the plain, the dead are being counted, and the living need water. The wind carries the smell of hot iron and old blood. Tents flap like torn sails. A healer from Dol Amroth, with salt in her hair from a life at sea, kneels by a boy from Pelargir and tips water into his mouth, one drop at a time. The boy looks past her at the sky, and the night trembles as if it could fall. Elrond finds Círdan and speaks low and swift. Círdan's hair, like pale sirach in the wind, is matted with soot, and there is a long, raw burn across his left forearm, wrapped in a strip of linen that already sticks. When Elrond tells him what Isildur has done, the old mariner's eyes close. He stands very still. He lives, Elrond adds, and he is not sure whom he means. Then the enemy is less than he was, Círdan says at last. But the root is not cut. It will grow again. Gil-galad walks through his people, and they make way in silence. He calls a council when the mountain has stopped shuddering, and night has laid a dark cloth over the burning world. The fire still paints the undersides of the clouds, and ash falls light as snow. Elendil's body is laid out under a flag that has been dragged through fire and blood, the white tree blackened to a tangle. Elendil's hand is wrapped around the hilt of Narsil's broken shard. Isildur kneels there for a long time with his head bowed. The thong around his neck catches a stray gleam. He does not see it. A bird cries somewhere out in the dark, a harsh, desolate sound like a blade drawn over a stone. They speak a while later in the wreck of a tent lit by a lantern, so smoked that the light is a dirty puddle. Gil-galad's voice is carefully gentle. "I cannot command you," he tells Isildur, "and I would not. I stand beside you in grief." "I am not your vassal," Isildur says without looking up. His fingers are locked on the hilt that is no longer a sword. "You are my ally," Gil-galad replies, "and that is the stronger bond." Isildur's breath is a long, shuddering drag. "It is owing to you that he fell," he says. "It is owing to me that he did not touch you with that hand a second time. I will not argue debts. I will carry my father's line north as he intended." "You will leave Gondor in your nephew's hands?" Gil-galad asks. "Meneldyl is young. So was I when Numenor burned." The words are half a laugh, half a sob. "I will set my house in order, and then I will bring my sons to Arnor. That was decided long before this night." Elrond says nothing. He looks at the shape under the flag, at the dark stain that has spread like a map across the cloth, and then at the broken sword. He sees the glimmer of the gilded hilt and the cold dullness of the blade, and it looks like a promise, but he does not know to whom. There is a moment when Gil-galad could call the banners and stand across the road north and forbid Isildur's departure. He does not. The army of the Alliance is an army of the exhausted and the grieving, and he will not turn friends upon friends in the red shadow of the mountain where they have just thrown down a god. He takes counsel with Círdan, with Elrond, with Glorfindel newly come from the far west in a body that does not tire. They agree to set watches along the Anduin, where the river runs swift and treacherous through reeds. They agree to shadow Isildur at a distance, not to provoke him, but to shield him. They agree to hold their peace unless the world itself snaps underfoot. What is victory if the seed of ruin is pocketed and carried home? How long can wisdom hold when grief burns like a coal pressed between the ribs? When dawn comes, it is a gritty, grey thing with no promise in it. The mountains are banded in smoke. The plain is a patchwork of tents and pyres, and the first of those have already been lit. Gil-galad stands high on a heap of tumbled stone and speaks to the remnant. His voice carries despite the burns. He gives them thanks. He gives them words that lay honor on the dead and breath to the living. He does not give them the one sentence that would have made this victory clean, because that sentence requires an act he cannot compel. Isildur turns away before the speech ends. He walks with Haradust sting in his eyes to the river, where a few trees make a black fringe along a torn bank. He washes his face in grit-tinted water and looks at his hands under the ripples. They look like his father's hands now, larger than a man's hands should be. The ring presses at his chest. He does not take it out. He straightens, and two of his captains come to him and stand at a respectful distance. "Prepare the company," he says. "We ride at first light." There is laughter that night in parts of the camp where young men and women have lived to do what they have never thought they would do again. There is quiet in other parts where someone has set a cup of wine against a laid-out hand that will never close. Fires crackle, and the sparks go up in a wind that smells like bone dust. Elves sing low in a tongue the men cannot understand, and the voice of that song has the aftertaste of salt and dreams, as if it had been learned at the edge of the world where the sea goes on forever, and no storm can dent the horizon. The army breaks camp and spreads out again like a net cast across the lands of Mordor. They cross the east road westward, with their boots raising light tills of ash. The mountains behind them brood like beasts. Eagles turn high above with wings like persistent thoughts. Isildur rides flanked by his sons, Elendil, Aratan, Sirion, with men he trusts riding behind. He looks east sometimes, and his face hardens in profile so that the line of his nose and brow could have been carved in marble. He does not speak much. Ugliness runs under the words of those who ride behind him, like a low stream under stones. Relief that the enemy is fallen, pride in the men of the West, and a sullen unease when they see an elf's long shadow on the road ahead. In the halls under the white roofs of Osgiliath, the bells do not ring yet, because there are no bells left. Meneldil waits with a boy's fear under a man's face and listens to the counting of the returning. Gil-galad gathers to him the tatters of his people. He sends some north toward Imladris, that sheltered place under steep cliffs where a waterfall always feeds a thin, soft rain, and some west to Lindon beyond the Lune, where the sea's breath tastes like a promise of endings and beginnings. The second turning point showers splinters through the story and leaves the light bent. At the Gladden Fields, where the Anduin runs wide and still, and the air is all water sounds, and the click of reeds against stone, men in green with wet leather over their boots watch a line of riders threading the flats on a path that only men who live there can read. Fish flicker under the shallows heavy with silt. Dragonflies stitch the light. A fisherman in a scraped skin boat with tar under his nails hawks and spits into the water and thinks about the child his wife is carrying. He's thinking about the way the reed beds move and the feel of mud between his toes. He looks up and squints, and dust teems from many hooves, low and thin across the frayed land. He cannot smell sweat over the green water and the heat. He cannot see that some of the riders carry the grief of kings. He eases his boat into a deeper tongue of water and watches. The ambush, when it comes, is a long hiss of arrows and the sudden dark of men rising up out of the reeds. There is a river sound, the quiet cloth-lapping of death when bodies fall into water. The fisher claps his hand over his mouth and nearly tips his boat. Shouts rasp across the flat world. The air fills with the high-shorn sound of cut reeds and the deeper sound of metal hitting meat. Isildur's horse rears with the sudden pain of a shaft in its side, and he rolls free by instinct years old, the broken hilt of Narsil slick in his hand. Elendil cries out, and the sound cracks as if with a fault line underneath. Aratan's face is red and white all at once. Sirion yells for someone the fisher has never heard of and will never know existed. The men of the Gladden hold, with knives like black teeth and shields hung with reed fringe, fall upon the Númenóreans like the river falling from a weir. Orcs crawl from a copse, bigger than a man's nightmare, but smaller than the giant that fell like a house at the mountain. That shadow is gone from them, and they are bewildered and savage without the old command. From the north, swift and silent, come a dozen elven riders clad in blue-grey, their spears white in the light. They fall upon the flank of the ambushes with a long cry that bends the air and makes the hairs lift on the fisher's arms. Their horses hit the reeds and the water with a petulant hiss. The first ring of riders around Isildur parts like wool under a blade. Elendil goes down with an arrow in the throat. He is trying to say something and cannot, blood boiling out of him like wine tipped from a cup. Aratan stays, and that choice is the end of him. He turns his horse back into the heaviest press, with his mouth set as if he were going to bite. A furtive spear catches him under the ribs. Sirion sees his father's white face over a knot of grappling figures and throws his last javelin. It takes an orc with a pig-cut ear through the chest. Sirion cannot twist free of the 5 men who drag him down by the mail coif. There is more blood in the water. The Anduin carries it away and makes it no thing at all. Isildur's gaze catches a smear of blue in the reed shadows and the glimmer of an elf's eye. Elrond is not among them. Nor Glorfindel, the one who leads, is called Larion and will not be remembered by any song in the ages to come. He sees the ring under the king's shirt glint as the thong breaks and something bright falls in the reeds. Larion's shout is a warning and a plea. "Leave it!" he cries. "Go!" His spear takes a man through shoulder and lung. Isildur drops into the river. He does not mean to lose the ring. His fingers scrabble at his breast and catch at nothing. Years will make that single failure into a legend of doom. He is swept by the current and panic closes his throat. Water gets into him and the world is all cold and green and light scratching the surface like a cat. A hand catches at his hair and drags him up. The fisherman's hands are calloused and smell of fish and old rope. He sees the white face and does not know it, only the common thing of a man who will drown if he does not pull. He hauls Isildur over the side and the boat dips and slops water like a bucket. 2 other men in other boats make crosses of their paddles without knowing they make a sign. The man in the boat heaves his liquid cold burden and the weight tips them into water again, and the fisher swears, and he digs like an animal, and the boat comes up. Isildur coughs until his ribs feel as if they will split. He clutches at his chest, and there is nothing there but skin and a heavy ache. He makes a sound like someone has torn through his belly. "No," he says, and then he says it again, but softer. Behind them, Larion takes a spear between the shoulder blades and falls with his hand stretched toward the glimmer he has seen. He does not know the shape he dies reaching for. His eyes are on reeds and light, and the thought of sea salt on his lips, in a world that is entirely water. The river sucks quiet over what it does not keep. Weeds sway like hair in the eddies. The fisher sees nothing golden and thinks of bodies, and he rows hard for the nearest patch of solid ground not already painted in men. He touches the man he has saved lightly with the back of his fingers. The skin he glances off of is cold and smooth, like a fish come to shore too soon. There is screaming on the flats. The elf riders go in close. One breaks his spear and draws a long knife and kills with it until he himself is a fall of white leaves, and it makes very little difference. When it is over, the wind goes shallow. The fisher looks into the face that lies on the planks of his boat and sees a man, and only later will he piece together the story that says he touched the brow of a king with hands that smelled like river and clay. Elrond hears of it in the next day's dusk. A runner from Lindon finds him under the cliffs of Imladris, and a small company rides out to meet the remnants creeping up the road with eyes like old men's. They arrive over the river, where it splits around a pale tooth of stone. Gil-galad stands a step behind Elrond, his face unreadable, the burns across it starting to knit into stiff cords. Isildur walks with his head bare and the hair clinging to it like wet reed. He's not wearing the ring. He's not wearing a sword. He kneels. His voice is raw. "I lost it," he says. He swallows. "I lost it, and I lost them." They bring him in. They wrap him in a cloak that smells of river and resin. They place a cup in his hand, and he wraps his fingers around it and leaves it untouched. The fire in that hall throws gentle light along wet boots and wet hair. Elrond looks at him for a very long time across that small heat. Gil-galad says nothing. The third turning point does not feel like an ending. It feels like a beginning that could have chosen another heart, and did not. They send word to Gondor that Isildur lives, and that the ring does not. Meneldir sends back a reply sealed with wax that has warmed in the sun. The writing is careful. The words are dutiful. The man who holds them while Gil-galad reads has a sharp ache somewhere under his heart that he writes off as the after-tremor of fear and grief. Gil-galad speaks with Isildur alone 2 days later. They sit on a bench under pine trees that drip resin into air that always smells like rain. The light is green where it comes through thick layers of branches. The river is a sound below them, like 1,000 muffled voices. A thrush calls once and then again. Somewhere, a deer stamps and shakes water from its coat. It is all very calm, and their voices feel too loud in that peace. "You will return to Arnor," Gil-galad says. "Yes." "You will leave Gondor in Meneldir's hands." "Yes." "You will set watch along the Anduin." "Yes." "With elves, if you will supply them." Gil-galad is quiet. "We will. We will keep a chain of eyes from the Gladden to Pelagir." Isildur stares at his hands. They are clean now, though the cuticles are ragged and the nails are black at the half moon, with a line of something that will never quite go. He says suddenly, without looking up, "You should hate me." Gil-galad is still. "I have never found hate very useful. If I had, I would be relieved by it. I am not relieved." "I am relieved," Isildur says. He finally looks up. "It is gone. I do not wake up wanting to run back to the fire and open my hand. I do not wake up wanting to put it on more than I want breath. It is gone." Gil-galad nods. The nod is slow and heavy. It is gone. He thinks of Tserdan's words. He hears the sea he has always heard in the shell of his own ear, the Old West calling. He looks east where the river runs and back up the road rising under the pines. He hears the cry of the mountains still lodged somewhere in the back of his mind, like a heavy thing set in a corner that he keeps catching with his eye. At the council later that autumn, when the leaves along the Loudwater burn bright and thin in air that is like a clear bell, they gather under Elrond's roof. Galadriel is there with a face like snow under sunlight. Her eyes bright as ice melt. Celeborn beside her like a patient tree. Durin's emissary, with lamplight oil on his hands and a beard in neat braids, shakes his head when Elrond speaks of binding watch on the east for 100 years. "We will watch our gates," he says, and the plump, soft mountain man with him laughs under his breath, like someone who has found the map he wanted in another's book. Thranduil, who is yet new in a crown that sits like a stone in his hair, does not look at the charred places on Gil-galad's skin. He says through teeth that still ache with his father's death, "I cannot spare a company to the river. Every living elf I have will pull its own weight in greenwood and then some." He does not say that he curses in his bed at night, quietly. In a tongue he has from his mother, the pride of those who would not take counsel from those who have lived many thousands of years watching waves. "The river then will be watched by men, and a few of ours," Tserdan says. He has rolled the linen bandages down to scratch at the skin of his burn. "Watch wears people out. They will fail sometimes. We will plan for failure as best we can." Glorfindel smiles without showing teeth. It is a thing we became good at very long ago. Isildur listens with his hands on his knees, the knuckles pressing through the skin like stones. He does not speak. Outside, the ordinary world turns with a serenity that feels like indifference. In the market at Fornost, a woman sells apples with red skins and white flesh that smells like wine. Her husband spits at the mention of elves, but does not mean much by it. He brings home cloth that has the blue of a bright sky after a storm, and she runs it through her fingers and thinks it will make a shirt that will bring out the gold of their son's hair. In Osgiliath, a mason whose skin has cracked under summer in the sun, and then under winter in beating rain, lays one brick on another brick and sets a plumb line and thinks about what it will be to have the stone dome whole again. He drinks small beer from a cracked cup at noon and looks up and sees the sky through the place where the old dome burned away, and his mouth goes thin. He thinks about sound under that dome the next time there is a king in it. He does not know that 100 years later, the same sky will be seen through a different gap, and no one will even remember this cup. When winter comes, the hills around Rivendell are clean with snow, and the water runs black where it runs at all. Isildur goes north at last with a thin escort. He rides in snowlight like a man learning to carry an invisible thing. Gil-galad walks alone sometimes at night along a cliff where black water eats rock and makes a low sound. He thinks about another choice he might have made, and for a moment he hates clubbed, useless wisdom that says the line of blame in stories like this is always braided. He sends Galdor to the river, and he sends a company to the Wetwang, and he writes letters to Meneldir that are careful and courteous. He keeps his hand away from the affairs of Gondor as much as he can, because he respects sovereign bonds, and because if he puts the weight of his will on the kingdom of men, some good things in that kingdom will buckle. He becomes to them a tutor who does not enter the classroom, a wave on the horizon. Isildur's return to Annúminas is a thin procession under a sky the color of old lead. The people know what to do anyway. They line the streets and they do not cheer. They hold candles and the wind snuffs some of them out, and a few children cry because the mood in their parents' faces is frightening. Isildur's bootfalls are slow up the palace steps. When he passes under the lintel, something like winter breathes on the room. He is kinder than he was. He is fiercer in small ways. He walks in the gardens at night as if he is waiting for an interruption. He sometimes wakes with his hand clenched around a thing that is not there. He goes to the nursery with hair wild and sits on the floor with his grandson Valandil crawling into blankets, and says into the baby's soft foot, "I am your grandfather," as if he expects the child to tell him what to do. Snow thaws, and the river watchers report that they have seen a golden glint sometimes when the water goes very low. Men dive and come up with fingers blue and shaking and teeth chattering, and nothing to show for it but leeches and curses. A soldier chisels a ring of copper as practice for when he finds the real thing, and he wears it one night to the tavern, and it has a green mark on his finger in the morning that his wife scrubs with sour milk and salt. They laugh. There is one man who will later tell his drunk friends that a strange little fellow with sharp eyes came by his shop asking about pretty ringses, and when they laugh, he sees a white hand on his throat in his thoughts, and does not sleep again that night. The fourth turning point comes as a rumor first, and then a rumor that does not go away. In the north, in the cold hills, Someone with a crown of frost and a will like ice has raised a banner under night. He takes a name of scorn and makes it a title. Witch King, Raven Lord, King of Knives. He does not gather orcs loudly, and at first there is nothing to see but winter that goes on a little too long for comfort in certain valleys, and a fog across the downs that will not lift. Men who go to search for strayed sheep do not come back. Children wake with screams that sound like a fox taken in a trap. The men of Rudor begin to talk too much with men from beyond their borders, who bring trinkets carved with ugly smoothness, and leave very little behind them but suspicion. Elendil's house in Arnor splits along old fault lines. Cardolan looks south toward a river, and Gondor and sees a weight of dignity and wants it. Rudar turns east with hunger and breathes in smoke that smells like hot blood. Arthedain holds, as it always has, the center of the pattern, and its weave is strong, but strong weaves are the ones that tear under certain kinds of pressure. Gondor is not immune to the division that rides like a cold horse through the world. Meneldir says the right words. His captains bow. A few stare east at the sunrise and the thin line of cloud like a blade across it, and feel an itch under their hearts. When a man with a narrow mouth and a talent for making loyalty sound like common sense begins to whisper about the danger of a hand too often laid on a city from very far away, some men listen. He says nothing overt against the Lord of Imladris or the High King of the Elves. He says a single thin thing very, very often. Gondor is strong. Elves fade. A boy in Calenardon, under a big sky, learns to listen to the wind running over grass. The smell of that wind is like a clean blade. He can drive a spear into straw with a single snap of his arm. He thinks about getting to the river and seeing a ship. He does not know that his grandchildren will be called Eolingas, and that they will ride to a king in need. Isildur spends a winter reading old histories by a fire that pops and throws sparks onto the thick carpet. He keeps his gloves on sometimes, even when the fire makes the room hot enough to drowse in. He goes to a window and looks into a dark garden at another light, this one moving as a servant carries a candle past a hedge of dead rose. He thinks of a point of gold that went where he could not follow. He wonders if there is a story in which he puts a thing into fire when he is told. He knows there is not. In spring, he receives word that a force has moved across the Weather Hills with a speed that is wrong. Amun-Sul goes silent for 3 days. When it speaks again, it does so in our old language of smoke. The watchers in the North Fires say that the blue never wavered so suddenly. The men who run with torches to feed the next beacon arrive out of breath and see there is nothing left to burn. Gil-galad rides. He tells Elrond to hold Imladris and keep the house if it has to lift from the earth itself to do it. He tells Círdan to keep the harbours in a way that looks as if he is telling him that bread is bread and water is water. And the old mariner smiles and says he will. He leaves Lindon with a small force of very good fighters and a very few torches that will stay lit in any wind. He finds Fornost and the kings upon its height and sees that the people stand firm because some of them do not know to be afraid. He ousts corrupt men from councils where they have sat for a day and for 20 years. He does this without shedding blood. It is a very elvish thing to do, and the men who watch find themselves relieved and then irritated by their own relief. Isildur goes to Amun-Sul with a small company that includes his grandson, who is 9 and has eyes so clean and blue that a man cannot look too long at them without thinking of frost over a well. The boy will one day remember the long ride as if it were a story told about other people. The wind at Amon Sul is like a persistent hand. It smells like cold stone. The sky is low like a low ceiling, and the land around them is a map drawn in grey. The Witch King comes in at dusk with a sound that is not quite wings. Men with him do not scream. They gasp like men who have fallen into icy water. The ground feels like something is walking under it. The Nazgul are less than they will be in 600 years, and more than any man they can look at. They split the first rank of defenders like water split by a boat. The air goes thin, and breath matters like a coin. Isildur puts himself between the boy and the dark thing that moves like a knife. He has time to say to Valandil, "Do not be afraid." He has time to think he is not afraid, and then to recognize the smallness of that pride. He says, "Run." He lifts a sword that is not Narsil, and it looks very ordinary in his hand. Gil-galad arrives as the last fire is going out. He throws that little torch into the wind, and it burns like a living thing. The Witch King turns. There is a moment when they look full at each other across a span of air that crackles with something that feels like frost under sun. Gil-galad plants his spear in the earth, and it sings like a struck bell. The Witch King's cry is thin, but it tears every throat listening. Men put their hands to their ears and feel blood slick their fingers. There is a battle that no one has language for. Elves fight with a brightness that is not magic and not skill, but something between that feels older than either. Men fight as they have always fought, by planting their feet and trusting the one to their right and their left. Children run, and the brave ones pull other children with them. Old men close doors and pray with words they have not used since they were boys. Smoke makes a low roof. Glorfindel, who has cut his hair short for war and looks less like a painting for it, rides into the thick of it and takes down a captain of something dead that fights like a live thing. He goes through the press as if the world knows it will keep its nerve, because he has kept his. He does not see Isildur fall. Yeah, he does cross Valandil's path. The boy is running with his arms pumping and his mouth hard. Glorfindel leans over and pulls him up behind without slowing. He says, "Keep your eyes on me," and the boy does. Gil-galad meets the Witch King near the broken stair. They swing once. The spear takes a trailing tendril of black cloak, and it burns with a smell like old meat. The black blade misses him by a hair and leaves a thin line on the rim of his shield where it is a heartbeat from unmaking. The Witch King does not laugh. He does not smile. He knows he is not to take this enemy yet. Something very long and very cold holds his hand. Gil-galad thrusts again, and he does not miss by any measure that matters. His spear goes through where a heart would be if the thing before him had a heart. The shock runs back through Gil-galad's arms like cold thrown into a forge. It runs out his shoulders and up his neck and lodges in his skull. He hears something like a laugh, and he understands a little piece of a terrible thing, that the Witch King cannot be slain here and not by him. He pulls his spear out and the blade smokes, and his hands are bleeding where the shaft has broken skin. The Witch King withdraws. He does not flee, he recedes, like a tide that leaves the shore paralyzed. He takes small vengeances. A boy falls with his face white and his eyes open, and those who live will never know his name. A woman goes quiet forever on a threshold with a candle in her hand. Then it is done. Glorfindel sets his fingers on Gil-galad's wrist and does two things with one gesture, confirms he is breathing and assures himself that the line of kings continues here. Gil-galad nods and then is still. His eyes look east. His hand tightens and relaxes on the shaft of Eglos, and the white blade is dull with soot and something like a shadow. They find Isildur by a stone that has been there longer than men. He is on his back with his sword under him, and his boots braced as if he had been pushing at a door. He has a wound over his heart that is neat and sharp, and the blood has soaked in a perfect circle into the wool of his tunic. Valandil does not see him. Glorfindel does not permit it. He carries the boy away without looking back, but he will remember for centuries the way the man's mouth had gone slack and the way his hands had closed into fists with nothing in them. Gil-galad spreads a cloth over the king of men and sets a stone on each corner. He sits back on his heels, and the winter wind moves through his hair and makes the burned places hurt. He has lived while another king has not. He could have died on the mountain and left this to another. He thinks about that and then puts the thought away. He stands. He will not bend under the weight of what people who do not understand will think he should have done. The prophecy is spoken that night on a road that runs west. It is not spoken by Gil-galad and not by Elrond. Glorfindel is not given to presumption, but he sees what he sees, and he says to a squire who can hear and who will remember, "He will not fall to the hand of a man." It sounds like a kindness to the boy who hears it. It is not. It is a sentence that will hang in the air for many lifetimes and then drop into a street with an echo like a storm. After what they will call the Battle of Amon Sul, Arnor begins to decay despite all that can be done. Bolts are tightened, doors still rot in their frames. A boy who has lost his father at 9 grows up with more counsel than he needs from a dozen men who love that father and have ideas of him that will not match any man's living choices. Gil-galad does what he can and refuses what he must refuse. He does not set his own man as regent. He does not put an elf hand on the hand of the steward and say, "Press here." He visits, and he does not stay. He is one more pressure, even in his kindness. In Gondor, the mason under the dome finally hears a bell ring again, and the sound is like rain on thirsty land. People cry, and they do not know why exactly, except that the sound is clean, and the city looks up. A woman in Ithilien weeds her garden and hums. In Calenardon, men practice riding flat out in a wind that cuts. The breath in their throats is like ice. They lean low over new saddle bows and urge their horses into calls that the horses learn to answer with joy. The fifth turning point is quieter and then louder in a way that feels like thunder coming up through the body, not through the air. Time has passed. The watch on the river has become a profession that fathers teach to sons in words they put in hands. In the village where the fisherman pulled Isildur from the water, there is now a small stone carved with a name that began as a nickname, King Friend. People touch it when they pass with wet fingers, and the stone takes it and becomes green in places. The fisherman's son has learned to read the river's mood. With his feet, his daughter can split an eel with one clean movement, and she never smiles doing it. She has a scar on her hand where a hook went in wrong, and when it aches in a storm, she thinks about the day her father pulled a man from drowning and the way he shook afterward with fear and pride. Deep in Greenwood the Great, A sapling oak grows crooked because a shadow fell on it the year it was sap, and it had to lean for light. Thranduil has learned to govern by listening to the small merchants from the south, who come with strange spices and stranger news, and by letting his people dance when it is time for dancing. He has forgiven nothing and no one in his own heart. He has learned to work in the world anyway. He and Celeborn share a moment at the edge of the wood when a shaft of light falls through leaves and turns dust motes to gold. They say nothing. It feels like a truce between them and time. Galadriel spends an afternoon sitting alone on a balcony in a house grown out of trees. She holds a plain silver ring in her palm and rolls it over her fingers one by one and thinks about refusing a kind of good that would make everything else worse. She sees a gold flash under black water and a hand like a rooted plant reaching. She makes a small sound in her throat and then goes downstairs to speak to Amroth about bridges and whether there should be more of them. Gil-galad calls a meeting that is not called a council because the last great council led to watchfulness that has failed too often, like any human thing fails when built in a world that changes under you. He calls it a supper. They sit under roofs and eat food that was grown with honest work, and they drink wine that has a char to it because the barrels were burned a little in storage. They talk about Dol Guldur, a hill that has gone sour. They talk about the necromancer who is only a rumor. They talk about a rumor that is probably the truth. Círdan argues for action with the calm of a sea that has learned not to believe in death. When the wave is small, he says, I do not wait for it to learn the shape of the shore. Elrond says, we can go, and we can throw light into dark, but if the one lies underwater where only weeds can touch it, all we do will be only to remind him that his wound is temporary. What if the weed is not touched? Glorfindel asks. What if the river runs with no hand seeking in it for 100 years, and then a small hand finds, and the world spins on a smaller fulcrum than we wish? Gil-galad listens. He has learned a new habit of listening since the mountain. He says at last, we will go, and we will set a guard near Dol Guldur. We will send none who cannot bear to be near those shadows. We will not strike until we know what we are striking. We will not fail to strike when the time is right. A mason in Osgiliath drops a hammer and it scars his toe. He curses in 2 languages and then laughs. The sound surprises him. A child in the north chases a dog that chases its own tail, and they fall in a tangle, and the mother, who has just heard that her sister has died in childbirth, cries suddenly at the sight of them, from relief and from sadness both. There is an unexpected death on a different scale. In a quiet watchtower on the Wetwang, a young elf of the Falathrim called Turarion goes outside to see the stars on a night when clouds are low and a smell like cut leaves hangs heavy. A man he knows by sight stands there holding a cup. They nod at one another. The man tosses his drink into a bush as if he does not like the taste, and the sweet fermented smell rises. The elf says, I have not seen you in 3 days. The man smiles a little and says, I have not been here. He pulls a knife out of somewhere and makes a very neat gesture with it, as if he had made the same motion 10,000 times in his mind. The elf's breath leaves him in a warm rush, and then he is down. The man steps over him and sets a little torch to a door and watches it go from feeble to greedy. He rides away with something his mind will never call shame. the tower burns. 100 miles away, a man who has never been that man and never will be, wakes with a sense of wrong and thinks someone has stepped on a board in his own house. He goes and checks his children's beds, and he stands long in his own doorway, looking at a grey dawn like a tired eye. The practical consequence is that a stretch of river goes unwatched for a season. A small boat goes by at night with a rider and another. The rider has a message from east to west, and the other has knives that were meant to be thrown up into the air and cut a ribbon and miss him by an inch. Both pass through a net's broken place. Neither knows it. Later, someone will attribute a very large event to this very small lapse, and they will be wrong by a degree that makes the whole thing off by a country. Does that matter? It matters the way the weather on a wedding day matters to the bride. It matters very much and not at all. Years gather and are put away. In Lindon, gulls wheel and cry and leave white on the rocks. Their voices are like knives on glass. Gil-galad stands on a high place and lets the wind take the edges of his cloak behind him in a long rippling. He is not the young man who looked as if he were made of a very clean light. He is something like a tree that has grown on a cliff and has been hit by lightning twice. He does not look diminished. He looks shaped by something larger than a will. He meets a small, brown, quick people on the road south of Bree, who make him smile with a softness he hides. They are moving west, and they are tired of the east, where the shadow smells like a wet rug left in a corner too long. They call themselves Perianath when they want to impress, and hobbits when they do not. He gives them a place to settle that has hedges already, and soil that is good. He says, "Pay your taxes." They do, and they keep to themselves, and they bake bread with a crust that cracks like thin glass. He passes one of their farms once, when the air smells like hot crust, and for a moment he forgets every doubt. Then he remembers. A very old woman in the angle looks at him and sees an elf with algebra written into his skin. She thinks of her mother, who went into labor in a field and then kept picking beans while the baby came because the house was far. She thinks of the beans she herself picked yesterday and burns her finger on the iron pot. He does not know any of this. He knows her hard, dry hand when she shakes his without fear. The sixth turning point nearly comes off without blood. It would have changed everything, and then it does not. Gil-galad hears that a company of Southrons are moving north along the Tournament Road with drums that sound like stones hollowed by water. He hears that a pale scholar with ink-stained fingers has been seen among them. The rumor that he is one of Sauron's old students grows like mold on bread. He rides with a small, very quiet group to a point where their road must cross his. They watch from a stand of beech trees with bark that is smooth under their hands. The light is green. The dust from the road comes up in puffs, and the beads of the Southrons' braids click like teeth. The scholar, when he appears, is older than anyone expected, and he walks with his back a little bent. He has a scroll case with him and a little urn with a lid. Gil-galad smells pitch and something under it like cinnamon. They could take him here and now. They could take the case and the urn and find in them a set of very clean instructions for a very dirty ritual and the ashes of a broken thing that cannot be the one, but could become a lodestone for what is left of it. Gil-galad looks at Círdan, and Círdan looks at him, and they both know what to do, and they do not do it. Why? Because set behind the scholar is a line of children holding one another's hands who have been bought to be traded somewhere else for grain. Because running from the other side of the road is a woman with a silent mouth and blood on her knees, and she will run into any blade with hope shining like a knife in her eyes. They go out, and the lines blur. Elves are very good in a confusion like this, but there is one small boy who holds a catcher for a cricket he means to eat and darts at exactly the wrong time. Círdan's expression afterward is like a cliff that has just lost a great piece off its face. The scholar throws the urn into a ditch and runs. Gil-galad catches him by the shoulder and turns him, and the old man smiles and dies very neatly with something sharp in his own heart by a hand not his. The scroll case is empty. The children cry. The woman glares so hard at Gil-galad that another man would flinch. He bows to her as if he has been accused in a court with a case truly made. After, in the green, he holds the empty case and looks at the beech bark, and the thin silver ring on his hand glimmers like a piece of language he cannot quite translate. He thinks of heat at his chest that never came. He thinks of the Witch King's cry. He thinks of a river. The different path is not brighter. It is simply other. Gil-galad lives, and because he lives, mistakes are made by those who respect him and those who resent him, and the world bends a little differently. Arnor declines more slowly and with more grace. The watch on the Anduin is better and more honest for longer. Gondor looks west sometimes, and that tugs it straight for a while when it wants to tilt south. Yet the shadow on the edge of Mirkwood spreads like a stain on wet paper, no matter how much weight they put on the other corner. The White Council forms earlier and knows earlier what it does not dare do yet. Ordinary people still light lamps at dusk. They still sit and listen to insect song and watch the last light run along the river like something alive that does not care for any of them. A man in Pelargir learns to build a boat with a curve like a woman's hip and slides it into the water, and it floats true. His son runs fingertips along the hull and thinks about places the river goes. He will go up there one day and leave a flower on a stone that says, "King friend." Centuries tick. The third age is like a long afternoon when you have eaten and you are tired, and the light is very gentle on everything. The colors begin to drain, and your mind begins to lean toward evening. Gil-galad walks along a shore and feels that ache. He remembers the sensation of the mountain under his feet like a horse turning, and he wonders, did his survival buy a longer twilight, or did it merely shift the hour at which something else would happen? He speaks to Galadriel under grass roots in a place where the light seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. They do not sit. They stand with their hands on a table made out of the cut trunk of a tree. "We will always be choosing not to reach for power," he says. "It is a choice one must make early in an argument or late. We did not make it early, and I have been making it since." Galadriel's laugh is like a flake of snow dissolving on a warm tongue. You will make it again, and the world will never quite thank you in language. That is what the wise do. They make the choice that brings no applause. Elrond, listening, thinks of a small child named Estel he will once hold and then call by his true name and send into a world that could eat him whole. He thinks of a hobbit who will one day come into his house with a ring in his pocket and a weight on his heart. He does not know any of this, yet he only has the feeling, like a path through a wood seeded with light where there was no path a moment ago. The conclusion begins in relief. A year of no droughts. A season when the goats do not sicken. The fishermen on the Anduin say it is as if the river has forgiven them. Gil-galad sits on a step and takes a mouthful of bread and a mouthful of cheese and a swallow of cool and thinks this is good. He crumbles a little of the bread for the birds, and a small brown bird hops nearer, and he thinks about how much of his time he has given away to keep nights like this safe. Then disquiet creeps in, thin as smoke under a door. There are more orcs in the Etten moors than there were. The fog on the downs stays longer. There is sickness in dale that men cannot name. On the whetstone near the Gladden, a white fungus grows with little teeth in it. Men who have cut it scratch when they sleep and cannot stop. A woman loses her child and stares at the cradle and sees it rocking and does not move to push it, because if she does, the space inside her will shift and everything will fall. The world is transformed and familiar, and the colours have edged toward grey. In Lindon, the wind smells like hurt and healing both. In Imladris, there are children with soot on their noses who do not know they are living under a hand that has been burned for them. Gondor is strong, then foolish, then strong again. It does not betray its old friends, and that matters. Arnor falls less hard. The Witch King waits. He is patient. He has been waiting a long time. Gil-galad grows quieter. He writes less. He stands more often with his eyes on nothing that others can see. He is not fading. He is not breaking. He is enduring with a patience that can look to the short-lived like absence. He sees ships made in the havens that he could take, and he does not take them. He will not go while there is something he might hold here, even if holding is like catching fog in a closed hand. Círdan gives him a look with meaning in it. You will not leave. I will leave, Gil-galad says. But not because I am tired. I will leave because the last thing I can do for them is to show them I will trust them with this. Is it a kindness? Círdan asks. Is it an abdication? It is both. In Osgiliath, a mason dies in his bed with the back of one hand, rough from a puton and taken off glove. He has not seen battle since he was a boy. He has seen the dome completed twice. He has known 5 kings. He has eaten bread in spring with butter like sunshine. He has walked once with his granddaughter along the river at night and shown her where the stars fall into it like spilled sugar. A hobbit, very far from this, and yet near in the way of things that matter. He sits in a round kitchen with a fire that has almost gone out and hears a knock at the door. He opens it and sees a wizard. He does not know what the word wizard will come to mean to him. He has never said to a king, I am not able to go to Mordor. He will one day, but not this day. When the shadow rises again in Dol Guldur and moves to Mordor like a rot that relocates where it can eat more easily, when the Nazgul ride black as thought and the Witch King's cry makes the marrow of men's bones go cold, when a halfling with a hungry curiosity touches a ring in a cave and everything changes, Gil-galad is there still. He does not sit a council with a beauty that makes men weep and say, do not tempt me. He does not place his hand on a small shoulder and say, I will take the ring. He does not, because the ring does not surface in his day. He leaves a network, a living thing with edges frayed, but strong. When he goes at last, it is not in defeat and not with joy. He walks down a narrow pier at sunset. The sky is smeared like a bruise, turning yellow around the edges. The gulls are at him like critics. Círdan's hand on his forearm is warm and dry. Elrond stands where the water smashes against rock with a sound like iron gates. Gil-galad looks back only once. He sees hills that when he came knew his name as if it were a password. He sees hills that now will not need passwords at all, because those who live here will own the land in a way his people never did. It is relief, it is disquiet, it is both. He does not think of the ring when he steps aboard. He thinks of a spear with a flake of soot on the point that he never polished off. He thinks of a boy named Valendil with blue eyes like winter's promise. He thinks of a woman in Ithilien with dirt under her fingernails. He goes, and the world makes a different sound. The thematic reflections come only when the heat of the work is done. The choice at the mountain was not between wisdom and folly, but between two kinds of loyalty. Gil-galad chose loyalty to alliance, to not make war on a friend, to not set a precedent that an elf can draw a line across a king's throat and call it good. Isildur chose loyalty to grief, and to a sense of right he could not pass away from pride. The world he left was bruised by his choice. The world Gil-galad left was marked by his endurance. What changes when a king does not die? Many small things that add to large ones. Ships come home that otherwise would have never been built. A line of petty king's mistakes, patience for permission, and does not burn a village it would have burned. A boy grows up who would have been cut down. Prevented tragedies are not visible the way dramatized ones are. Yet the prevented tragedies change the air. Men breathe easier, and they do not know why. The last image is not of a king boarding a ship, and it is not of a ring under black water. It is of a night on the Gladden, years after the ambush, when the river is flat as thought. The moon lies on it like a coin, and the reeds whisper like conspirators. A thin fog moves in a long lean like a cat. Somewhere under this, under the soft cold royal, a circle settles and stirs with the current, and touches a stone worn smooth by ages. It pulses, and something very far away turns in sleep. Gil-galad, in a dream on a ship with its timbers smelling like pine and salt, turns his head as if he heard a small tap on a door that will be opened by other hands. He does not wake. The ring waits, and in its reflection the night stars look like eyes that will never close.